Okay, I'll call the meeting to order. My apologies to everyone for being late. I didn't look at my reminder until it was too late. I'd like to begin by acknowledging that we are in Treaty 1 territory and the traditional homeland of the Métis Nation. My name is Neil Harden. I'm chairing today's panel. With me is Brent McIntyre and Cynthia Stevens, and the secretary today is Ellen Robo. All right, we will be hearing applications for revision of the assessment roll in accordance with the Municipal Assessment Act. The matters for which revision is requested have been described in each application, and we will limit discussion to those matters. The statements that the applicants or the assessor make at this hearing are sworn testimony, and anyone speaking to the matters must be sworn in. Be advised that comparison of assessments of properties are not considered evidence of market value by the board. The board is appointed annually by council and is independent of it in the city administration. It makes its decisions on the basis of the evidence provided at this hearing and issues a written order that will be mailed to all parties as soon as possible. Please note that the board's decisions with respect to an application may be appealed to the Manitoba Municipal Board if the matter pertains to assessed value or classification, or to the Court of Queen's Bench if the matter pertains to the application of exemptions from taxation. Should you wish to appeal, information on how to do so will be included with the board's order. With respect to the hearing process, I will confirm the matters to be addressed with each applicant following the swearing in. We will then have the assessor's testimony followed by questions that the applicant may have, then the applicant's testimony followed by questions. Each side will have an opportunity to summarize if they wish. Once all the evidence about an application has been brought forward, the applicant may leave. The process will repeat for each item on the docket today. The session will close after all the applications have been heard, and the board will deliberate in private and make its decisions. You will receive the order by registered mail as soon as possible. As information, all public hearings are live stream recorded and will be part of the public record. Okay, so we have a number of properties on the agenda. So the first property is 1486 Regent Avenue West.
That's you, yeah.
My property is on Woodley.
We had, that one was.
1486.
Oh, sorry,
Oh, yeah.
yeah,
Two withdrawals
withdrawn.
at the top, yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah, sorry. 1182 Wolseley Avenue then.
Please state your full name.
Can you affirm the evidence about to present the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Thank you.
All right, Mr. Assessor, can you lead us through the property?
Okay, subject property with the roll number 120808 40000, street address 1182 Wolseley Avenue. The 2.5-story single dwelling with 2018 effective year build at 2018 effective age. It has a walkout basement with a basement finish, attached multi-car garage, 10,851 square feet of lot size, and land influence is a Cinnabon adjacent. 2018 assessment roll is $1,474,000, or total assessment per square foot $366.12. There was a recommendation made to reduce the 2018 assessment to $1,200,000 or $298.06 per square foot to better reflect April 1st, 2016 market. Our property owner, Noah Milo, accepted the recommendation during a phone conversation on May 15th, 2019.
Okay, is there any questions from the panel on this? No. Okay, thank you very much for that. Then we have 826 Regent Avenue, and are there 2 assessment years for revision here? Oh, okay,
Certainly.
excuse me, I understand, well, let's move on to number 6 on the agenda, 1700 Waverly. I believe that's going to be a confirmation. Requested.
For East Santucci.
And you swear the evidence about to present is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, help you God? Please state your full name.
There you go, Farmer.
And you affirm the evidence about to present is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you.
Good morning. Late good morning.
Mr. Chairman, this property was actually, the 2018 assessment was heard by this board and confirmed by this board. And a 2019 SUP is issued. Now, there was a corollary issue relating to the penalties. In the original decision of the board, very similar facts, then the board denied the penalty. But what the 2018 assessment is at the municipal board level, and what we're suggesting in all the circumstances is this matter will have to be debated at that board for a full decision, and asking for confirmation at this time of the 2019 SUP.
Okay, so you're not going to be presenting any evidence then?
At this stage, no. If the board's comfortable with the 54-1 confirmation, then
Well, we don't do 54-1 per se, we just proceed without the evidence from the applicant or the appellant.
well, okay. I mean, I'm not agreeing to the penalty though. So
Yeah.
if we have to have the hearing, then I want to have the hearing. But if the board is comfortable with the nature of the request, and I believe the assessor's in agreement with it, then we're fine.
Okay, that sounds the way to proceed. Can you just lead us through the information on the assessment, so we have some evidence to
Okay, so am I just gonna go through the quantum and not the?
the quantum, yeah.
Okay, so this is file number 19-23, roll number 0306-504-3600. The roll year is 2019 with the reference date of April 1st, 2016. This is a auto dealership. We have a gross floor area of 24,921. The recommendation was to maintain for quantum the 2019 assessed value of $3,834,000. If you flip to page 2, you can just see the aerial view of the property. If you flip to page 3, you can see the property, the building prior to the addition, which is why we're here today for the sub. For pages 4 and 5 just have pictures of the interior. Page 7 has our rent comparables, which have a total weighted average of about $16.95. Page 8 just shows the income workup. We use rent rate dollar per square foot of $12.78 with the overall capitalization rate of 7.5%. If you flip to page 20, we have the previous board decision. 21 is, pages 21 and 22 are part of the assessor's brief from the original hearing in 2018. And page 23 is just the, page 23 and 24 and 25 are just to do with the permits with the addition.
Okay, yeah, we'll need to quickly recess on this. I take it you're still requesting the penalty on?
Yes, and then
Okay, we're gonna have to caucus on how we proceed in this case. Okay, thank you. We, in this issue, because a non-co-op has been requested, and I take it city's not abandoning that request, then we will have to hear evidence on the non-co-op.
In that case, Mr. Chairman, then we should stay at the back end of the order, because then I'll be arguing value as well. I mean, the intent had been to just follow the previous board decision, both as to the penalty decision and the value, which was confirmed. But if we are having the debate, then I fully intend to debate and give evidence and such. So then we're happy to get out of the way and have the other properties heard in the order of the docket, and we'll have the debate at the end.
Okay, I guess we can recess the hearing on this property and then come back to that. So we'll recess the hearing on 1700 Waverly and go back to 826 Regis.
Please state your full name,
David Thomas George Penner.
and you swear to identify or present as the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
Yes, I do.
Thank you. Please state your full name,
Mark Newman.
and you swear to identify or present as the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
Okay, so we have 2018 and 2019 assessment years. I propose that we hear them both at once, and if there's anything different about 2019 that needs to be addressed, please do so in your presentations. So you may proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The property is 826 Regent Avenue West. The roll number is 0900755100. This is a property owned by Canada Corporation of Manitoba Limited. Mr. Chairman, I do have a preliminary matter that I'd like to raise at this time.
Okay.
On May the 3rd, I requested pertinent financial information regarding this hearing from Mr. Newman and did not receive that information requested. And on that basis, I would like to shift the burden for non-cooperation for failure to comply and further ask that a deferral penalty be applied for non-cooperation.
Is that May the 3rd of this year?
Yes.
Okay, did you send that?
Specifically, the information I requested via email was clarification on net VLT income for this property. It's an issue that has been raised in our preliminary discussions on the property. And also I wanted to confirm the VLT count. It has gone up from 40 back in the reference period to 45 to 47 and subsequently to 50. And I wanted to confirm the dates that those things happened. So I believe this was pertinent information for today's hearing, and I didn't receive the information back.
Mr. Newman?
I'm a little surprised by this. It is correct that Mr. Penner requested certain information from me. First of all, I always understood that it was in the context of some without prejudice discussions in the context of attempting to resolve this matter. But having said that, so the VLT count that he's speaking about, these are items that occurred post-reference date. So again, let's just clearly understand, the hotel has VLT machines within it. And I believe he's raising an issue about the number of VLT machines that are on the site.
Mm-hmm.
And in the relevant time frame, his material actually at page 7 of his brief, makes reference to there being 45 VLTs. That's actually at the reference date not correct. That is post-reference date information in terms of when that happened. At the reference date, the number of VLT machines was 40, not 45. But in any event, so that's a piece of post-reference information, but the assessor has the information as to the number of VLTs because he gets a questionnaire response every year that provides the information as of the date of the questionnaire. So I don't really understand why this request is being made from that perspective, but more importantly, it's post-reference. And maybe I should just back up and explain to the board why we're here on a supplementary. That might help inform the board as to what's going on. The reason we're here is because the hotel historically had 50 rooms, and the hotel did an expansion and increased the number of rooms from 50 to 101. So it's the 51 additional rooms that brings us here by way of a supplementary. That was the physical change that occurred to the hotel. And of course, part of your role is to look at the physical premises as at the taxation year, 2018, 2019, and to put those physical premises into the economic conditions of the reference date, April 1 of 2016. So that's the issue that results in the supplementary assessment. The VLT machines is not a change to the physical plant, and in any event, as I've said, that is an item that has changed post-reference date. It's an economic issue, it's not a physical issue, and because it's occurred post-reference date, it's irrelevant to the issue of a request for information, and it's irrelevant to the request for the imposition of a penalty. So the request should be denied because there's no basis for it.
Do you have a?
Mr. Chairman, yes, if I may. The number of VLTs speaks to the income capability of the property. So we're looking at the physical number of VLTs, so it is pertinent information. I can use an extreme example for example, if in 2018 they removed all the VLTs from the premise, Mr. Newman would be saying that VLT income, which was there in the reference date, would not be going forward, and he would request an adjustment for that. The same thing when you're physically adding VLTs, we're doing an income approach. Those VLTs can be expected to generate additional income. So we're looking at when those VLTs went in and the income we could expect using April 1st, 2016 as the reference date. But that's not all the information that I requested. I actually requested a breakdown of the monthly VLT income right up until March 31st, 2016. We have a mailer returned to us for fiscal 2016, which goes 2 months past the reference date. So I was also asking in my request the monthly income from the VLTs so that we could see exactly what those VLTs were generating right up until the reference date. So that information certainly is within the reference period and was not provided to us.
Okay,
Can I ask a question of the assessor?
yes, yeah.
So are you telling me that it is the practice of the city assessment department, every time there is an adjustment in VLT machines, up or down, that the city is doing a revaluation of the hotel every time that occurs?
Yes,
So you're going to go back and readjust every hotel that has lost VLT machines over the last number of years?
of course we would.
You're going to actually do it? You're telling us that that is the practice, and the city assessment department will go back and make an adjustment for every hotel or bar or licensed facility that has seen their number of VLTs reduced?
It would show in a reduced income, obviously, and that would reflect in the assessment. It's an income approach.
That's not my question. My question is, are you going to make the adjustment just because there has been a change in the number of VLTs?
Mr. Chairman, I believe the question is irrelevant to the case at hand. The case at hand is we requested pertinent financial information for this property, and it wasn't provided to us. That is the question at hand, not whether we'll adjust up or down other hotels. We do every property the same way on an income approach. So if income is down because VLTs are down, we will. In this case, the income from the VLTs was an issue in the valuation of the property, and that's why I sought out this information to clarify my position and justify my position.
Let me ask an additional question, if I might, Mr. Chairman.
Okay.
When we came before this panel in the fall of 2017, or would have come before this panel in the fall of 2017, to deal with the 2018 assessment, were you seeking an adjustment to the value based on a change in VLT machines?
No, we did not.
Why?
We weren't aware of it.
You weren't aware of it, but you get the questionnaires, you are aware of it.
See, as you stated, we're here on a supplementary assessment because the number of rooms doubled. What effect will that have on all the income sources is a question we need to ask. One of those things we looked at was VLTs, all right? So we prognosticated about it and thought VLT income would more than likely rise with the addition of 14,000 occupied room nights. I mean, those people want to be entertained. Some of those people will use the VLTs. So we looked at the reference period and saw what each machine was using. We also noted that, that was based on 40. So we worked out an average, realized that in 2018, along with this expansion, there was 5 more VLTs. So based on that average, we added for what we could expect in additional income for 5 more VLTs based on that average. To further bolster that position, we thought we would look at 10 months after fiscal 2015, right up until the reference date, and that would further validate our position, which it does. In fact, it had already increased substantially over fiscal 15, even prior to the rooms expansion. So it's completely pertinent to this case, important information in the valuation, and that's why we requested it.
Okay,
I have 2 final comments, if I might.
sure.
So the issue, my questioning about whether this is going to be done for every single hotel or other facility that has VLT machines, this has never happened historically. Manitoba Lotteries moves around VLT machines all the time. They make adjustments in the number of machines that any given owner or facility may have. There is an equity issue here, and I'm suggesting that what's happened is Mr. Penner is taking this position in relation to Canad only. This position is not being taken in respect of other hotels or other facilities. It's a position that's never been taken in the past, and I don't accept for one moment that the assessment department intends to go back and adjust every single other facility that has lost VLT machines over the years. And if they're not intending to do that, there's no basis for them to be doing this post-reference to this property in particular. And then my final comment is, I don't believe that this is an appropriate request under section 16(1)(c), but in any event, the request having been made on May 3, today is May 17, the 21 days has not passed for the request to be responded to, and so the request is out of time.
I have noted that 21-day period. Your response on 21 days, that would make it May 24th?
Yes, technically that is correct. There's still time to respond.
Okay, and I was also interested in what Mr. Newman said about it being part of without prejudice discussions. What was your understanding of that matter?
We had some discussions as to value. Mr. Newman requested that I explain each line item and why I came up with these values. So we differed substantially on the VLT revenue that we stabilized at. He believes it should be based on fiscal 2015. We believe at the very least with the addition of 51 rooms that VLT income would increase. However, I was looking for evidence right up until the reference date to validate my position, and indeed it has. I have managed to figure it out based on averages. I would have liked confirmation by getting the actual information up into the reference date from Mr. Newman, but it was not forthcoming.
Okay, any questions from the panel to either party?
No.
I just wanted to clarify, so you had information for the 2015 year, and you were trying to, the additional months leading up to the reference period, January to April, that's what you were looking for?
From, their fiscal year ends May 31st of 2015.
Oh, May 31st, okay, so you were
Right,
looking
so that's,
for,
I'm looking for the
Okay.
10 months after that.
10 months, yeah, got it.
Which I believe validates my position on
Okay.
VLT revenue.
Okay, that's all I had.
Okay, then we shall caucus to decide the preliminary issue. And I think it's easier for us to leave the room again. All right, we've caucused on this matter, and since 16.2 clearly gives a 21-day period, which has not yet expired, then there's simply no way we can hold the appellant in non-cooperation. So you can proceed with your on the value.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So continuing on with the front page of my brief, the 2018 assessed value based on this supplementary assessment is $11,646,000. The supplementary assessment came about as a result of a significant expansion and renovation of the property. In short, 51 rooms were added. Some of those rooms added were suites. The 2018 value had been heard, the base value was heard, and the value was $5,893,000, and this value was not challenged at the board. The permit value for the addition and renovation is $6,118,000. If you'll turn to page 54 of my brief, there's a copy of the permit there, and you can see the total project value indicated at $6,118,000. So a significant expenditure, capital expenditure on this property. The licensed capacity of the property is 1,948. The number of VLTs on the property in 2018 is 45, and there are now 101 guest rooms. My recommendation is to confirm the 2018 supplementary assessment at $11,646,000. Turning to page 2 of my brief, I indicate that we have done the valuation on an income approach, and we'll find that on pages 7 to 9 of my report. Underneath that, I've listed some of the hotel amenities. These are most common to Canadians properties, including Altos, Ambassador Banquet Room and Conference Center, Tavern United, Playmakers Gaming Lounge, Slashers Pool and Water Slide, Kids Theme Rooms, Canada Cash Counter, Nashville's, and a beer vendor, the Bottle Stop. I've listed some of the guest room amenities there that are common to all of these rooms. Turning to page 3 of my brief, if you may, I have made some notes here. The hotel has performed very well over the past several years. The occupancy rate reached 88% in fiscal 2015, that being the year ended May 31st, 2015. And based on that high occupancy, the owners decided to undertake a $6 million plus expansion and renovation of the hotel. And the expansion, as we noted, more than doubled the number of rooms to 101 from 50 existing rooms. The expansion comes on the heels of several $1 million of upgrades to the hotel over the past couple of years, including renovations to Altos, Tavern United, Nashville's nightclub, Playmakers Lounge, and the Banquet Conference Center. The property was inspected on January 15th of 2019 by myself, along with Arif Das Mohammed from the Assessment Department, and Lane Ledahowski was present from Canad Inns. It was noted on inspection there was 47 VLTs in the Playmakers Lounge, up from 40 in fiscal 2015. Subsequently, we inspected the property and note that VLT count has increased yet again by 3 and now stands at 50 VLTs in total. Page 4 is some commentary on cap rates, which I don't believe are at issue here today. Turning to page 5 are some excerpts, pertinent excerpts from the Municipal Assessment Act. And turning to page 7, I'll go through my income valuation summary and how we derived the value of $11,646,000. So an income approach is the accepted approach for valuing a hotel. We look at the income from all sources for the hotel, and we also look at the expenses incurred in generating that income. We derive a net income and we capitalize that to determine the value. So when this hotel doubled its rooms and completely renovated their existing rooms on top of the renovations that had happened prior to that, we have to reevaluate the income that we can expect this property to generate. So at the top, we see the available room nights increased from 18,250 in the reference date to a present 36,865. From that, we need to derive what we expect in terms of a daily rate, an occupancy rate, and a revenue per available room. So we do look to the reference period material to guide us in that. So looking at fiscal 2015, we see the average daily rate was $99.46. The occupancy rate very high at 87.61. Anything over 80% generally triggers a hotel operator to want to expand their rooms. And that's exactly what happened here. And finally, we see the revenue per available room is $87.13. So each available room would be expected to generate $87.13, or that's what it actually generated in 2015. So based on that information and considering the extent of the renovations, we used an average daily rate of $110, which was an increase from the reference period. New modern rooms and renovated existing rooms would generate a higher average daily rate. I mean, that's exactly why a hotel would undertake an expenditure of that magnitude. The occupancy rate, we lowered the occupancy rate slightly from 2015 to 80%. When we're looking at that and the addition of a significant number of rooms, we think perhaps there'll be a period where they're scaling up and bringing occupancy back up. When we spoke to Mr. Ledahowski on site, we asked him how those new rooms were scaling up. Were they ramping up in a timely manner? And he made a comment that struck me, and that was that all those rooms were contracted for prior to the completion of construction. So in some cases, we would expect that with a doubling of rooms, that occupancy would decrease. In this case, though, we were told that those rooms were fully booked and occupied, so we wouldn't see a significant drop-off. So the revenue, based on ADR of 110 and an occupancy rate of 80, we have a revenue per available room of $88, which is exactly in line with fiscal 2015, so we believe it's completely reasonable. We don't see any reason that the revenue per available room would drop. So based on our revenue assumptions, we project that a stabilized amount for room revenue would be $3,244,120 based on the 101 rooms. Food and beverage revenue, we would expect food and beverage revenue to increase with the addition of 14,000 or so occupied room nights. People staying there, some of them are going to eat there at Tavern United, some of them are going to drink there and spend their money there. However, to be conservative, we maintain the food and beverage revenue at the existing 2015 level. So we didn't make a projection, even though we suspect that revenue would certainly go up as a result of a doubling of the rooms. Same thing with the vendor revenue. We would expect some of those additional guests might spend some money at the vendor. However, we maintain the vendor revenue at the existing 2015 level. And same with other income, we maintain that at the reference period level. So the only adjustment we made to revenue was what we would expect from doubling of the rooms. Now, looking at the expenses, we used $973,236 for projected rooms expense. Now, this is 30% of the room's revenue. When we did the 2018 assessment, we used 26%, so we've actually bumped that percentage slightly. Generally speaking, there's some economies to be had when a hotel expands to this nature, but we did allow a higher rooms expense ratio. The industry average for rooms expense is 25%, so we're being more than fair with our rooms expense. Food and beverage cost and wages, we maintain at the same level as fiscal 2015 and at the same level we used in the original 2018 assessment, which was not challenged. Same thing with vendor cost and wages and other expenses. We maintained all those expenses at the same level as already agreed upon. The undistributed expenses, we increased them in line with the projected additional revenue. Generally speaking, we kept the percentage of revenue the same as previously agreed upon. The rest of the expenses there, marketing, energy, R&M, management fees, franchise fees, FF&E reserve, we maintained all those expenses at a similar ratio as previous. The taxes there, we adjusted the taxes slightly higher to account for the higher value, but we maintained the same percentages that was used in the original 2018 assessment. Same thing with insurance, we increased the amount but maintained the percentage at 0.8%. So flowing through the projected revenue and expenses, we have an NOI before VLTs at $633,104. So this brings us to the VLT income, which we've heard a little bit about, and I'll expand on that just a little bit. In 2015, that $534,225, that was based on 40 VLTs. We know in 2018 they had 45 VLTs. So what we did was we took the average for 2015, the average revenue per VLT machine, and we added for 5 more VLTs, which makes sense. And based on that, we come up with $600,000 in VLT revenue. Now, Mr. Newman believes that we should maintain our VLT revenue at the actual fiscal 2015 level. So we think projecting for 5 additional VLTs was correct, but since Mr. Newman had issue with it, we thought we would take a look at fiscal 2016, which ends May 31st, 2016. In other words, it goes 2 months past the reference date. We're reluctant to look at anything that's post-reference, so we won't, and that was the nature of my request for those monthly VLT numbers. We could start at April 1st, 2016, count 12 months back if we had the monthly breakdown. So without that information, what I did was I took the total fiscal 2016 VLT income and divided by the 40 VLTs in place at that time, and came up with the average of $15,678 per VLT. In 2015, the average was $534,225 divided by 40, or $13,356. So we already saw an increase in VLT revenue, net revenue per machine, even without the additional VLT machines. So taking 10/12 of that fiscal 2016 average, the 10 months right up until the reference date, that accounts for $522,600. Taking the last 2 months from the 2015 info at that lower average, that's another $89,000. Totaling that up, we can see that the 12 months right up until the reference date, the VLT revenue was already $611,000. Our $600,000 projection for VLT going forward is conservative in light of that. So And that's even without any additional VLTs down the road or additional business that you would expect from more patrons. So we think we've been fair throughout, reasonable and conservative assumptions, and that the property is full value for the $11,646,000 assessment here. And I will ask that the board confirm that value. I'll just go through the rest of my brief. On page 8 is a breakdown of A&G expense items. Fiscal 2015, the total was $494,000. We bumped that to $610,000 to take into account additional activity with the additional rooms. And page 9 is a reconciliation between the income reported and taking out expenses which aren't allowable for assessment purposes and reconciling the income. Turning to page 10, you can see with the top photo is the overhead view of the hotel before the expansion, and the bottom photo is the hotel post-expansion. So that long stretch that stretches down in the middle, they added a third floor on a portion, and at the end they added a 3-story addition, and that's where the new rooms are located. Continuing on, page 11 are just various photos of the hotel, children's theme suites, page 13 and 14. Going through, we see on page 15, Splashers water slide, a feature of this hotel. There's the dining area, page 17, and the nightclub. Banquet hall, on page 18 and 19, set up for banquets and weddings. On page 20, we've included the financial submissions of CanAds for 2015, 14, and 2013. And that's the basis of our stabilized workup. And those financials go to page 50. Now, if you'll turn to page 51 of my brief, this is a Winnipeg Free Press article that came out just prior to CanAds, or right when CanAds announced their expansion plans for this hotel. And there's some important points in this. At that time, they were anticipating adding 63 new rooms. Turns out that they added 51. And I've already made reference to this, but Mr. Ledahowski notes the hotel had already undergone several $1 million worth of upgrades over the past few years leading up to the reference date, including renovations to Alto's Tavern, Nashville's Nightclub, Playmakers Lounge, and the Conference Center. So he indicates that all that was left to do was renovate the existing rooms and do this expansion. A lot of money had gone into it. Goes on to say that the hotel has performed very well and that it was time to do this overdue expansion. On page 53 and 54 again is information from the permits that were taken out for this expansion. Again, we note that the project value was $6,118,000. On page 55, again, we see the impact that this has had on room rates.
Mr. Chairman, this is post-reference, I'm going to object.
Which
Page 55. This is information at January of 2019.
Okay, any,
Well, the addition itself is post-reference. We need to ascertain what impact that would have on room rates, and that's why that's included. If you wish to strike that information, that's fine. Generally speaking, we'll just say that brand new modern rooms and renovating existing rooms up to very modern style would be expected to increase your room rates. adds further credence to the,
We will, what's that? We'll strike this as being post-reference.
okay, Mr. Chairman, thank you. Turning to page 56 is the status of title. This is a status of title that was included with the permit information. We see a registered mortgage there for $5 million. Turning to page 59, we see that based on the expansion plans.
Mr. Chairman, I'm going to object to this as well as post-reference,
Status of title.
as of January of 2019.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, the status of title tells us what charges are registered against the property, including a mortgage. We believe that those types of things can impact the value, and that's why it's included, if nothing else, just to show the bank's view of the additional value on this project.
Post-reference.
Yeah, we'll, again, if it's post-reference material, we'll strike it.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, that basically summarizes my presentation. The property was in the roll at $5,893,000 prior to this supplementary. We can see that over $6 million was spent upgrading and expanding this hotel. We've made reasonable projections of income and expenses based on our knowledge of the reference period and anticipating future income from various sources. We believe, if anything, we've been conservative here, that the value is very fair at $11,646,000, and we would ask that the panel confirm the value.
Okay, is that it?
Yes, thank you.
Questions, Mr. Newman?
Yes, thank you. Mr. Penner, let's just help the panel for a moment. Go to your page 7, please. So page 7 is the workup of value, and essentially what it reflects is the methodology that's utilized for the valuation of hotels, correct?
Yes.
And essentially what that valuation does is, unlike any other kind of property, it uses the actual revenue and expenses of the business operation, correct?
Correct.
And it then removes certain items for the purpose of coming down ultimately to what in theory is the value of the land and building, in other words, the real estate only, correct?
Correct.
And the way that's done to get down to that value, if we look in the section of the document called undistributed expenses, and third item from the bottom called management fees, that's put at 4%, and fundamentally that's a calculation based on 4% of revenue, and the purpose of that is to remove the non-assessable business value or goodwill, correct?
Yes.
And then if we go down further, we get down to the bottom of the page. You've got the net operating income, you're capitalizing it, you get to a value, in this case $13,701,000, and you then take an FF&E deduction of 15%, $2,055,000, and that is to remove the non-assessable chattels, correct?
Correct.
And so essentially, this is a residual form of valuation in the sense that the starting point is the revenue and expenses of the business, but through these deductions, what you're in theory left with is the value of the land and building. Agreed?
Agreed.
And that's the methodology, and this is what we've been working with ever since you and I have been doing this, which is now quite a number of years, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. Now, also, over all the years we've been doing this, the CANAD fiscal year end is May 31, and accordingly, the practice has been year after year after year, all the years you and I have been doing this. Is that about 10 years now?
Yeah, roughly now.
Okay. So all the 10 years that you and I have been doing this, the financial statement that is used is the one for the fiscal year ending May 31 preceding the reference date, correct?
Correct.
And in this case, that would be May 31 of 2015, and that's the statement that's been used. Agreed?
Agreed.
Okay. So this hotel does an expansion, adds 51 rooms, and your task is to figure out what the economic impact of that is going to be at the reference date of April 1 of 2016, correct?
Yes.
Your task is not to take into account economic conditions which are subsequent to April 1 of 2016. Agreed?
Agreed.
Okay. And so whatever might happen in 2018 or 2019 is irrelevant to the task of determining value at April 1 of 2016.
In terms of the economic conditions?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. And when we go back, still staying on page 7, so at the top of the page, where you've got that section, available room nights, occupied room nights, average daily rate, occupancy rate, and RevPAR, the columns 2013, 14, and 15, those are statistics derived from the hotel questionnaires, which reflect the performance of the rooms division or department of the hotel.
Yes.
Okay. And you're looking at that, and so for example, when we look at average daily rate, the average daily rate is derived by dividing the room revenue, the actual room revenue, by the number of available room nights, correct?
Yes.
And so that tells us what the average daily rate was.
Yes.
And when we look at those 3 years, we actually see a downward trend slightly in average daily rate down from $102.81 down to $99.46, correct?
Yes.
And we also see a somewhat upward trend with respect to occupancy, where it's gone from 75 and change to 78 and change up to 87% plus, correct?
Yes.
The average of those 3 years in terms of occupancy is approximately 80%.
I didn't do the average.
Okay. I have, so it's slightly over 80%. And so what we now have happening is we have a doubling of the available room nights, another 18,615 room nights that are being dropped into the marketplace generally, but they're also being dropped into this specific hotel, correct? And your view of the world is that notwithstanding the actual rates that the hotel has been generating, which in 2015 was $99.46, your view of the world is that notwithstanding the drop of all these additional rooms into the supply, the room rate is actually going to go up. That's your view?
Correct. Yes, it is.
Okay. And are you aware, sir, that frequently hotels, in order to gain additional occupancy, they essentially have to buy that occupancy in the marketplace by making their room rates more attractive to consumers, by lowering them? Are you aware that that happens frequently in the context of hotels?
Sometimes happens.
Okay. And notwithstanding your familiarity with that concept, your view of the world is that this hotel would actually be able to increase its room rates by 10% rather than potentially having to buy occupancy by reducing the room rates.
Yes.
And there's nothing I can say or ask of you that will cause you to change your view in that regard, is there?
No.
Let's look for a moment, or let me ask this general question. You repeated on a number of occasions that the original 2018 assessment was $5,893,000.
Yes.
And you made mention on a number of occasions that that was agreed to. So let me ask you a couple of questions about that. In 2018, an appeal was filed in respect of that value, correct?
Yes.
And that appeal took issue with a number of things, which included the rooms department expense, agreed?
Can you say that again?
That appeal took issue with the rooms department expense percentage.
I'm not sure the appeal was withdrawn, so we didn't take it to
So-
appeal.
But that wasn't my question. My question was whether the appeal took issue with the rooms department expense ratio. A brief was filed.
It's possible.
All right, you're not disagreeing with me. Did the appeal also take issue with the food and beverage wage expense ratio?
It may have, ultimately it was agreed upon.
And
Level it is.
what you describe as agreed upon, is it also correct that it was agreed upon in the context of a global settlement which saw all of the 2018 appeals for the Canad hotels resolved?
That's not my view.
That's not your view. So let me ask you more specifically. Is it correct that in September of 2017, 4 Canad hotels were heard before this board and decisions rendered?
That's correct.
Is it correct that scheduled for later in November were the remaining 4 Canad hotels?
That's correct. I believe there was 5 left, actually.
Okay. And is it correct that agreement was reached to not appeal the 4 in respect of which decisions had been reached and to settle the remaining 5?
There was a desire to do that, yes.
And in fact, that was implemented, that was agreed to.
That did happen.
And part of that package was the withdrawal of the appeal for the Transcona.
We reached agreements on 3 and 2 were withdrawn.
And one of those was Transcona.
Yep.
And my point to you simply is that when you say it was not contested, in fact, it was contested, but part of an overall resolution, a package, that the end result was that the remaining 5 hotels were settled, and this was one of them.
Again, it's not my view that we treated it as a package, which would imply we'll accept that value if I get this value here or there. Those weren't the discussions. We, as my recollection takes me, we looked at each one individually, had agreement to reduce value on 3, and 2 of them were withdrawn.
And all of that was in single exchanges of communications. In other words, it was an email from us dealing with all 5, it was a response from you dealing with all 5.
That's correct.
Okay. And in 2015, when the original assessment was done, no alteration was made to VLT income, correct?
No, we used the 2015
Right.
actual.
That notwithstanding the fact that by then the department may well have known that subsequent to the reference date, there had been an increase in machines.
Yes.
The concept of an investor buying property, do you agree that investors buy property both for a return of their investment and a return on their investment?
Yes, I agree.
And is it typical that an investor gets a 100% return of their investment in the first year?
Suppose it's possible, but I wouldn't say it's likely.
No, I agree. Typically, what you'll see is over a longer investment horizon, the investor gets a stream of income which is both a return of and a return on the investment.
Exactly.
Okay. So what you've done here is you pointed to the fact that there's a permanent value of $6,118,000, correct?
Yes.
And you move the assessment up by round numbers, just shy of $6 million, correct?
Correct.
And so effectively, you're saying that this investor has received 100% return on their investment in the form of an increase in value immediately?
No.
No?
How has he done that?
Well, the value of the investment has moved from $5.8 million to $11.6 million and change.
Right. Because we've discounted the future expectations of the income and expenses to to indicate the present value.
Okay. Forgive me, I have to extend my parking, I apologize. I am done. Okay, just a couple of more questions and I will be done. The issue of VLTs and the increase in VLT machines subsequent to the reference date. This is not something you've ever done in respect of any other hotel, correct?
Well, as I've said, with the additional rooms, we need to make reasonable assumptions on the income. We made what I felt was a reasonable assumption on the income, which you disagreed with. So I set out to garner additional information on that to validate the revenue that we chose, which in hindsight, and looking at the information right up to the reference date, we can see that VLT income was already in excess of that. So we completely feel that a future revenue stream from the VLTs of 600,000 is not only achievable, but more than likely low.
But what you looked at has nothing to do with the change in rooms. Because the rooms didn't change until 2018, agreed?
Yes.
So by looking at information leading up to April 1 of 2016, that's got nothing to do with the change of rooms.
So, but we've used a value a lower projection of revenue than was even achieved in the reference date prior to the
But
expansion.
my point to you, Mr. Penner, is that historically, and you answered this earlier, what has been used is the May 31 fiscal year end statement preceding the reference date.
Yes.
For the first time ever, you've now changed that approach. For this hotel only, I'm suggesting to you.
Well, the reason is because of this significant expansion, we need to revisit each income and expense line, which we have, to make reasonable projections of the effect of the additional rooms, which we have. We believe 600,000 is more than reasonable, given the expanded rooms and given the VLT count. So we've taken all the information into account.
What do you know about people who patronize VLT machines?
I don't know anything about them.
Right. What do you know about their demographics?
All ages and
And if I
Types of
suggested
people.
to you that the people who patronize VLT machines in facilities like the Canad hotels are not, to any significant extent, room guests, but they are people in the local neighborhood, you're not able to respond to that, are you?
well, how would I know that?
Exactly.
But I think a reasonable expectation is the people that are staying there,
Yeah.
some of them want various forms of entertainment, and at least some of those people will find their way to the VLT lounge.
Right.
When we inspected the property in January, along with Arif, I believe it was a Tuesday afternoon, if I'm not mistaken, and the VLT lounge was pretty full for Tuesday afternoon.
Sure.
So there's a brisk business going on there. Is that a result of the expanded rooms? I would say some of it is.
The franchise fee. You fixed it at, according to your page 7, at 4% of total yes, 4%, correct?
Yes.
You're aware that under Canad's franchise agreement, the fee in fact is 5% of specific revenues,
Right.
right? And would you agree with me that your 4% franchise fee accordingly understates the franchise fee based on your numbers?
No, I would not. If we look at fiscal 2015,
15.
Yes,
Franchise fee reported was $280,091,
right?
which works out to 4%. And that was accepted
4% of what?
of revenue,
Total revenue,
adjusted revenue. yes.
right? But my point to you is, the franchise fee is not charged on total revenue.
But that's what it works out to.
All I'm saying to you is, it's not a correct calculation based on the actual agreement.
And what I'll say to you is in fiscal 2015,
Yeah.
280,000 was exactly 4%. We maintained it at 4% for the addition.
The 280,000 for the 2015 franchise fee is taken from the hotel's financial statements.
Yes.
All right. So it will be a reflection of what the actual agreement is, correct?
Yes.
It will not be a reflection of 4% of revenue.
Although
It may calculate to that.
Yes.
But that's not how it will be arrived at, is my point.
Correct.
All right. Those are my questions, thank you.
Okay, any questions of the assessor?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. In terms of the renovations, what date were they completed? And were they completed on that date and fully operational?
Let me check my notes. I believe we looked at the occupancy permit for the date. I don't recall exactly the date, but that's the date that we used and confirmed on inspection with Mr. Ledahowski.
But you don't know the occupancy date?
The supplementary was made effective May 1, if that helps.
Yes, so that would be it. May the 1st of 2017,
18.
18.
In terms of the rooms before the renovation and in terms of the rooms after the renovation, can you tell the board what was the makeup of the rooms, the initial 51 rooms?
Oh, how they were broken down?
In other words, were they just 2 double beds, or were they all single beds, or were they?
Yeah, no, there's a variety of rooms, and they report that information on their mailers. So, if you look on page 20, page 20 of my brief, you'll see the 2015 mailer submission, 50 rooms, 47 king size, and 3 suites, so they'd be equipped with king size beds, is what I would say.
And after the renovations were completed, what was the makeup of the rooms?
I'm not sure how that breaks down at this point, other than to say they've added 4 more suites to the mix. I'm guessing they'll probably break down in a similar manner to previous.
And according to the pictures submitted, there was some more children's theme rooms added?
I don't know about that. Those are old photos, stock photos from Canada's website, so I don't know that they added any more of the theme rooms. Generally, those are located fairly close to the splashers pool area to cater to children, but I don't believe they added any more children's theme rooms.
Okay, no further questions.
Cynthia?
Just a couple. So, in terms of the VLT income, when you were talking about other revenue up towards the top of your chart on page 7, you indicated that you had maintained other revenue even though the rooms had increased. So was there a reason why you maintained that and increased the VLT revenue? Based on
well,
there being more people in the hotel? And
it might be a little more difficult to quantify the additional food and beverage revenue resulting, and same with the vendor. But I think with the VLT revenue and based on an average per VLT, and adding for 5 more that happened before 2018, I thought it was a reasonable way to estimate that revenue, and especially seeing that that revenue had actually increased above that, gave me confidence that we were, if anything, being conservative.
Okay.
But it was easier to quantify, is
Okay.
what I would say.
Okay. And can you just, I think you mentioned it in your original presentation, but just the $110 a night that you came up with for the new room rate on the expanded hotel, can you just walk us through again how you came up with that number?
Generally speaking, one would anticipate that brand new modern rooms would garner a higher room rate. And that's what we see with hotels throughout the city after they've done a major renovation or sprucing up, that their rates do come up. More importantly, I think, the revenue per available room, we've kept that in line with what actually happened in 2015. And that's a function of the average daily rate and the occupancy rate. I'm not entirely convinced that the occupancy rate will drop to 80%, especially hearing that those rooms were already contracted for. But again, to be on the conservative side, we put the occupancy at 80% with a slightly higher room rate, which just common sense tells you somebody would pay a little more for a newer modern hotel than one that's a little tired and run down. But the revenue per available room was the number that we were most interested in.
And you maintain the percentage, yeah?
Yeah, it was 87, 13, and 15, and we would anticipate that $88 would be the least that they'll get.
Okay, that's all I have, thank you.
Okay, and I have no questions that haven't been asked, so Mr. Newman, you can proceed.
All right, thank you. I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to work you through the attachments to my brief, the tabs, and then circle back to the text if I need to. So tab 1 was the calculation of the assessment that Mr. Penner provided to me when I requested this information. And it contains the same $11,645,000 that he's explained to you out of his brief. The only comment I'll make to you is if you look in the lower right-hand corner, you see the number of VLTs being at 40, and what he's presented to you today shows the number of VLTs at 45. And my point to you simply is the VLT number was already moving around without regard to the issue of the number of machines. Then if you look at page 3 of tab 1, numbers in the lower right-hand corner, this was the original value of $5,893,000. I simply want to draw to your attention a couple of lines. There's a section called Department Expenses. Second section down, there's Rooms Department Expenses. And if you look at the stabilized column, you will see that the Rooms Department expense was stabilized at $413,000 compared to the actual 2015 of $718,000, which resulted in a disallowance of approximately $305,000 of Rooms Department expenses. And just to give you a little bit better understanding, in the hotel world, departmental expenses are typically expressed as a percentage of the revenue for the department they are connected to. So Rooms Department expenses are a percentage of rooms revenue. Food and beverage cost and food and beverage wages are expressed as a percentage of food and beverage revenue. So Rooms Department expenses were significantly down compared to the actual, You can see that in 2015, the actual was $718,000, closer to 45%, and nonetheless, it was brought down to 26%. That was challenged to the Board of Revision, and I'll say more about that in a few moments. The other item I'll draw your attention to is food and beverage wages. Actual 2015, $2,399,000, brought down to $2,210,000, so a disallowance of approximately $189,000. And what was happening here is that the assessor was of the view that the departmental expense ratio with $2,399,000 of expense was too high, and so he disallowed a portion of that expense, bringing it down to $2,210,000. That was an issue in the 2018 appeal, and it was made an issue in the brief, and I'm going to show you some things from that brief in a couple of moments. If you then jump to tab 2. So what you find in tab 2 is on the first page, there's 2 pages. The first page, this is the rooms department expense. And you can see in the first column, it totals $718,665. So it is the amount in the financial statement, the exact amount. But it also shows you what it's made up of. It explains to you what each of the expenses are, the specific expenses that make up that $718,000. Now, there is a history to what went on between Canad and the city. There have been lots of appeals of Canad hotels over the years. Most of them, I am happy to say, have been resolved. 2016 got resolved. All the 2016 appeals got resolved through direct negotiations between the city and the owner. 2018 got resolved in the fall of 2017 by way of the agreement. After 4 were heard, 5 remained to be heard, and we made a deal on all of them at the same time. All of the old appeals, the 10s, 12s, and 14s, and there was a supplementary 11 and a supplementary 13, they have all been resolved through case management at the municipal board. The only reason I'm telling you all this is what the process of dealing with the 16s allowed us to discover is that the way Canad was formatting their financial statements was not 100% consistent with what the city expected to see. And the result of that was that some of the departmental expense ratios were higher than what the city expected to see, and that was causing the city to make disallowances. And so, as part of resolving 2016, we went through a process with the city of explaining where things were classified in the financial statement and reclassifying some of those expenses, and that allowed us to resolve all of the 2016. What you see on the first page of tab 2, hotel security, janitorial, loyalty points expense, and security head office fees are expenses that, based on the city expectations, which I will show you in a moment, ought not to be in rooms, but ought to be somewhere else. And so what we did as part of the original 2018 appeal is we took $99,860 of expenses and we reallocated them to different areas in the financial statements. $68,000 went into a janitorial or security head office, $11,000 and change into hotel security, and $20,000 and change into loyalty points. Simply to show that what appeared to be an expense ratio that was too high, once adjusted for proper classification, was not in fact as high as it looked. And then the second page of this is the food and beverage wages. So remember that there was $2,399,000 off the financial statement, and this continues to be an issue here today. And the assessor took that down to $2,210,000, and essentially what the assessor did is the assessor took it down from 52% and change to 50% because the assessor believes it's too high. What this analysis did is it explained what made up food and beverage wages, and it showed that certain of these expenses needed to be in other places, And the end result of that was that we reclassified $88,000 of expenses, and what was a 52% expense ratio then came down to 38%. Why did we do this? Go to tab 3. Tab 3 is the hotel guide published by the assessment department. This is given to hoteliers as part of the questionnaire and explains to them, here's how we think you should be reporting your expenses. Unfortunately, external financial statements aren't always prepared by the external accountants in the same way, but this is the guide the city distributes. If you go to page 3, I put an arrow in the right-hand margin. That arrow is in relation to advertising, marketing, and promotions, and that tells you that expenses associated with attracting and retaining customers should go into the line in the questionnaire called advertising and marketing. But if we were to go back to tab 2 for a moment, we will find that there were certain expenses that were not going into marketing, like the loyalty points expense. So the loyalty program, that expense was not being put in marketing. It was being put in either the rooms department expense, or it was being put in the food and beverage wage expense. And so it got moved into marketing, which, as I indicated earlier, had the effect of reducing the expense percentage. Similarly, if you go to the last page, page 5, you'll again see 2 arrows. And just so we understand, what you find on page 5, you'll see under the heading category, column A and column B. These are for what are called the admin and general expenses. And the expectation of the city is that these will be put into the A&G section. And if you were to look at the assessor's questionnaires, the hotel's questionnaires, you'll see that there's a page, and let me just show you so that you can visualize it. If you go to page 23 of the assessor's brief, you'll see there is a column A and a column B. So this is where all the A&G, the administrative and general expenses, and administrative and general expenses are expenses that are not assigned to a specific department because they benefit the hotel more generally. This is where it goes in the questionnaire. And so if we now come back to page 5 of tab 3 and the arrows in the right-hand margin, what it's telling us is that janitorial should be in the A&G, and it's also telling us that security should be in A&G. But the hotel was not putting it there. The hotel was putting it either into rooms department expense or in food expense, food wages expense, and the end result of that is that those departmental expenses on a percentage basis, on a ratio basis, appeared too high. That was the purpose of all of that. That was in the brief that was filed in respect of 2018. And so I simply give you that to explain that when the assessor says it was accepted and not contested in 2018, that's not true. It was contested. It was in the brief for 18, but all of the 18s got resolved as part of a package deal negotiated at one time through single exchanges of communications covering all 5 hotels. That's the point I want to make simply. Tab 4 is examples of other hotel workups from prior years where if you were to look at the breakdown of A&G, you'd find that janitorial and security, in fact, were found in A&G in those years. Again, just to reinforce the point that historically, these expenses were put in A&G because of some things that happened with Canad's financial statements in 2018. That wasn't the case. Then go to tab 5, please. Tab 5 is the manual, as it's called. So every year, the assessment department for all types of property publishes a manual which explains how the valuations are done for the different types of property. This manual dated May 1, 2017 is the manual that was published for hotels. I want to draw some things to your attention. Look at page number 2 in the lower right-hand corner. So you've got a heading valuation at the top of the page. You've got a formula in that first top section of the page. And then right below the formula, perhaps more than any other income-producing property, the value of hotel real estate relates to its actual performance. And that's true. If the hotel business goes down badly, the value of the real estate will go down badly, as arrived at for assessment purposes. And that's the case even though there may have been zero change in terms of the physical nature of the building, but the value will jump up and down. Down at the bottom of the page, you've got a heading revenues. The city derives from the questionnaires averages for what they call hotels and beverage hotels. You will note that for 2018, the average occupancy rate was stated to be 65.7%. The average daily rate is stated to be $112.65. And that's the average reflecting the spectrum of hotels in that category. Some will be less, some will be more. Then one more thing here, and then I'll move on from this. Next page, page 3, departmental expenses, food and beverage costs, 35% of revenue, food and beverage wages, 48%. That's a total of 83%. If you go back to tab 1, page 1, which is the workup of the assessor, departmental expenses, food and beverage cost, 31.2%, food and beverage wages, 50%, the total is 81.2%. The industry average, based on what you see at tab 5, page 3, is 83%. Why is that happening? Well, because every hotel operates a little bit differently. Canad has buying power. It's able to keep its cost of goods less because it's got buying power. And that's why even though the industry average is 35%, they're coming in at 31%. The assessor is content to use that 31% even though it's below the industry average. However, their food and beverage wages come in higher than 48%. And the assessor has used 50%, but they're actually higher still, and so there is a disallowance occurring here still. So why is it being reduced below what the hotel's actually experiencing? If we're going to look to an industry average to bring it down, why don't we look to an industry average to bring up the food and beverage cost? Page 6, sorry, tab 6. This is an excerpt from the franchise agreement. The point I want to make to you simply is that the assessor's calculation of the franchise fee is not correct. It is not simply 4% of revenue. It is 4% of, it is 5% rather, of certain revenues. And when we are increasing room revenues, which are subject to franchise fee, and when we are increasing VLT revenues, which are subject to franchise fee, those increases. The franchise fee should essentially be moved by 5% of those increases. That should be the change in the franchise fee. So if the room revenue goes up by round numbers $1.65 million, then the franchise fee based on the room revenue should come up by $82,500, but it didn't. So if for nothing else alone, the $280,000, which is the actual franchise fee in 2015, it should have gone up by $82,500 because of the increase in room revenue. I'm calling it $1,650,000 for ease of math. And it should have gone up to $362,000. It didn't. It only went up to $340,000. And then VLTs went up by, let's call it $65,000. So the franchise fee should have gone up by 5% of that. That's another $32,000. So the franchise fee should have gone up based on these increases in revenues by the total of $82,000 plus $32,000, which by my math is about $115,000. It didn't go up by $115,000. It went up by $60,000. And that's why I have given you tab 6, because that is how the franchise fee is calculated. I gave you tab 7 because the same explanation I gave you earlier about how we had to make adjustments to some of the expenses and reclassify them into certain departments. These arguments were made on the first 4 hotels that were heard in the fall of 2017. Tab 7 is the decision of this panel on the Windsor Park Hotel, where in part the reduction was a function of the reclassification of the expenses that I've described to you. So, let me then finally come to tab 8, and tab 8 is the workup. It's our calculation of value. So, what have we done? The format is familiar to you now. The 2015 column is the actual financial statements for 2015. The assessor stabilized column is the assessor's calculation of the assessment that has been presented to you today. It's an exact duplication. The CANAD reclassified stabilized column does 2 things. It takes issue with certain of the revenue numbers, in particular rooms and VLT. And you can see that for rooms we're at $2,949,000 compared to the assessor's $3,244,000. So that's a difference of about $300,000. And on the VLTs, we are at the 2015 amount of $534,225 compared to the assessor's $600,000. So that's a difference of about $65,000. Member Stevens, you asked the assessor, how come no adjustment to food and beverage revenue? And his answer was conservative and maybe a little more complicated. I'll give you another rationale. It doesn't matter that much what you do to food and beverage revenue, because the profit margin on food and beverage revenue is quite low. You've got departmental expenses that even on the assessor's calculation are 81.2%. And then you've got the 4% goodwill and the 3% reserve, that's another 7%. There's not a lot of bottom line that comes out of food and beverage. That's why a lot of hotels hate the restaurant business, the food and beverage business, they rent it out. So it didn't really matter much what the assessor did on food and beverage, but it matters a lot what the assessor does on VLT, and it matters a lot what the assessor does on rooms, because on VLT, it's right on the bottom line. There is no cost associated with it, and with the rooms, the assessor's using 30%, so there's a lot of profit coming out of that additional, round numbers, $1,650,000 of revenue. That's what's making the big difference in the value of this hotel. So we did a couple of things here, and let me just walk you through them. On room revenue, we took the view that the average daily rate of $110 by the assessor is excessive. Yes, I understand the existing rooms have been spruced up, I'll use the word. Yes, they may have some new carpeting. Yes, they may have some new paint. The size is the same. They haven't changed from that perspective. They're in the same building. Yes, there are some new rooms there, but the number of room nights has doubled. And to assume that you can get a 10% increase in room rates when you're doubling the number of rooms, to me is a stretch. The reduction of the occupancy rate to 80%, that's actually consistent with the 3-year average. And when you look back at the stats, the average daily rate was actually trending down to the $99.46 in 2015. And so we considered the appropriately conservative view would be, let's fix the occupancy at 80%, consistent with the 3-year average. Let's reflect the $100 per night rate as the average. Let's recognize it'll take time for the hotel to ramp up. Let's recognize that there's a lot of additional room nights, a doubling of room nights that are suddenly dropped into the market. And that's why we picked the 80% and the $100, which turns into $2,949,000. Rooms department expense. As I showed you earlier, the assessor was disallowing in the original workup $300,000 of rooms department expense. When we reclassified the expenses, that turned into 38% rooms department expense. We've actually brought the rooms department expense down to 32% of our adjusted room revenue number. And I will certainly recognize that as you add room revenue, your departmental expense ratio should come down. It should come down, and that's why we have brought it down, but still historically, this hotel has operated at a higher rooms department expense ratio, and so we have, however, recognized an increase in revenue and fixed it at 32%. Food and beverage cost, the assessor and I are the same. Food and beverage wages, here is where we differ. We are at $2,310,000, 52.3%. The assessor is at $2,210,000, 50%. Where's the difference? What have I done? If I take you back to tab 2, first page in tab 2, you see that there's $99,860 of rooms department expense. That $99,860 of rooms department expense is the change I have made. It is why the rooms department expense in my calculation at tab 8 is now $2,310,000. It's not $2,399,000 as it actually is. I may have called it a rooms department. It's food and beverage wage. It's not $2,399,000. It's $2,310,000, 52.3% compared to the assessor. The other change I've made is franchise fee, but of course my change on franchise fee is a function of what I've done with room revenue and what I've done with VLT, because the food and beverage has not changed, and it is rooms and VLT that is subject to the franchise fee. And the other thing I have done, of course, is down at the bottom, I have put the VLT at the $534,000. That turns into a value of $7,715,000. So that is what I have done. I just want to turn the pages with you quickly of the text, because I have said, I think, all that is there, but I just want to point out a couple of things to you. If you go to page 2, the second bullet down, prior to the construction of the additional rooms, the room department expense in 15 was $718,000 with revenues of $1,590,000, 45.19%.
Excuse me, Mr. Newman.
Page 2 of the text, go right back to the beginning, no, the text, yes.
Oh, okay.
Thank you. So page 2, second bullet down, what I'm describing there is room revenue and room expenses, and I'm saying in 2015, rooms department expense is $718,000, revenue $1,590,000, that's 45.19%. In 2014, rooms department expense $723,000, $3,000, revenues of $1,442,000, that's 50.17%. Those are the actuals in 2014 and 2015. That's why I told you we went through the reclassification expense, and you see in the paragraph next that the reclassification, the $99,860 brought it down to 38.9%, and we continue to bring it down to 32%. The food and beverage down at the bottom, the food and beverage wages of $188,000. I was just pointing that out. Let me jump you ahead. Okay, I think I've got it covered, what's in the text, taking you through the attachments. So essentially what I'm saying to you is that I think the assessor ought not to be tinkering with VLT as he has, because effectively it appeared to me that what the assessor was doing was attempting to take into account the additional machines, because page 7 of his workup makes reference to 45 VLTs, which came after the reference date. And I just want to pause here for a moment and say to you generally, and the panel will know, I do a lot of hotels and have for a very long time. I have never seen the department come along and attempt to use a change in number of machines post-reference date as a basis for changing a value. And that's why I asked the assessor earlier on when he was seeking the penalty, whether when hotels lose VLTs, they're going to go back and adjust the values downwards. They're not going to. There's no hope that they're going to do that. And similarly, I don't think they should be making a post-reference date adjustment because the number of VLTs bounces around, which is fully under the control of Manitoba Lotteries and not under the control of the hotel operators. What happens if a hotel puts in fancy TVs with fancy pay-per-view or fancy games, things that in theory can generate more revenue? Is the department going to come along because there's been a change in this piece of equipment, in this television set in a room, and now change the revenues? VLTs are not a change to physical plant. It's got nothing to do with physical plant. And so taking it to the extreme example, Mr. Penner said if subsequent to the reference date, a hotel lost its VLTs, I would come looking for an adjustment of value. I've never looked for an adjustment of value based on an adjustment in the number of VLTs. If the Manitoba government, in their wisdom, suddenly decided as a matter of policy, no more VLTs, they are being banned, they are being removed from every private establishment in this province. Exist still in casinos owned by the province, but they are removed from all private establishments. That might be a different story. I might come asking in that context, because that's a change in the law. But what we're talking about here is an economic event after the reference date, which should not allow for a change in value. So I simply wanted to make that point to you. I think you've probably heard enough from me, and those are my submissions subject to questions.
Okay, before proceeding into questions, let's take a short break. I have to move my car before it gets towed away.
Let me get you this.
I got this, but 2-hour limit.
It's not. It's not.
It's not?
Not.
right, we'll come back to order, and it's your turn for questions.
I have no questions, Mr. Chairman.
No questions, any questions from the panel?
No.
Okay, that's surprisingly quick, I didn't know that.
Mr. Chairman, would I have an opportunity to summarize my position?
Yes. Yes, you
May
may.
I go ahead?
Yeah.
Thank you. So we heard an awful lot of evidence here today, and it is a lot to take in. So I just want to make some brief points to clarify where there might be confusion and reiterate my reasoning and why I believe my assessment is fair. Mr. Newman alluded to our 2016 Municipal Board Appeals and how we undertook a reclassification of line items, moved them around to come to an understanding of value, and based on the hotel guide and the uniform standards of accounting for hotels. And we did that in 2016. In 2018, CanAd had provided us with statements, and when we came to the appeal process, they asked us to reclassify line items yet again. So items we moved up into rooms, now they wanted us to move them back into A and G. So this whole process of reclassifying line items serves to confuse and maybe misdirect from important facts. So basically, we take the financials as presented, which we do for all hotels that submit to us. We stabilize based on the information provided. We don't undertake an annual, well, we should move this line item or that to come up with a value. So we've done that here. We've accepted CanAd statements as provided to us. We've stabilized the best we can and come up with the value. Speaking with regard to the 2018 base value, the value in the roll prior to the supplementary assessment was $5,893,000. That is a fact. That is the value, and I can assure you that CanAd would not withdraw their appeal on that if they thought that value was too high. That's not something that CanAd ever does, is withdraw, especially if they think the value is too high. So as I said, we've treated this process the same as all other hotels. We've accepted the income and expenses as presented. So what we're left here when we have a substantial addition of rooms, a substantial change in the physical property, is we need to look at what is currently there physically and try and garner what that would have, how that would have affected the financials had that been in place at the reference date. So that's exactly what we've done here. In other words, had these 101 rooms been here in 2015, what would the room rates look like? What would the VLT revenue look like? And that's, so we've made some reasonable assumptions with regard to the room rates perhaps increasing with a rental of this magnitude. Occupancy, we've talked about that as well. What would the VLT revenue be in 2015 if there was 45 VLTs in 2015? Mr. Newman has made clear his objection that we would adjust based on a higher number of VLTs presently, but we need to know what 45 VLTs, had they been in place in 2015, would generate. We can do that by using an average. But further to that, and this goes to the information that I requested, I wanted to know the 12 months right up until April 1st, 2016 to see what the VLT revenues were. Mr. Newman did not provide that information to us, but based on the average for fiscal 2016, we can see that that was already $611,000. So although he objects to the addition of the income from 5 VLTs, we're too low based on what we actually saw at the reference date on only 40 VLTs. So throughout the process, our assumptions are fair and conservative. They're backed by the evidence, and we think that the value is a fair value, and we would ask that the panel confirm the value today. Thank you.
Okay, submission, Mr. Newman.
No, I think you've heard me clearly.
Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you gentlemen for your time, and we will,
And I just might speak, if I may, Mr. Chairman, the 2019 assessment is based on all the same information. So whatever you decide for 18 will be the same for 2019.
yeah, that was the presumption, unless
Okay.
it was
Thank you.
something glaringly different.
I agree, just so we're clear.
Okay, now we shall go back to 1700 Waverly. Come on. My glasses, I can see it better. Wondering why everything was blurry.
That's okay.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay, so we will reconvene on address C2, 1700 Waverly Street. Now, you had a preliminary issue?
Yes.
Okay, you can proceed on the preliminary.
So, the assessor requests that the burden of proof be placed on the applicant for non-cooperation, following section 53(3)(b) of the Municipal Assessment Act, and then a reduction in assessment is ordered, that it follows section 54(3.2) of the Municipal Assessment Act. So, to do this, I will get you to turn to page 12. So page 12 just shows the owner, Richmond 6 Limited, and one of the directors' names near the bottom of the page is Murray Daniel. And then if we flip to page 14, I just have a company search for the tenant, which is Murray Import Auto Group Winnipeg Limited, which was the director information as Murray Daniel John. If we flip to page 16, we can show the mailer that was submitted. It is missing any annual expenses reported. These expenses are needed to develop a business assessment role, and they would also be used if we were doing a site-specific for analysis for an appeal. The owner has failed to report this information, and it is in their possession, it would be in their possession or control over this missing information. I just do want to follow up with it. On page 20, we do show that we did ask for this in 2018, and it was denied. To be consistent, I am asking for non-compliance for this one, for the supplementary assessment, and based on this information that I've provided here, I am asking for non-compliance to be applied.
Okay. Mr. Reimer, your reply
Thanks,
on
Mr.
the
Chairman.
report?
A couple of questions, and then I'll have a submission to present to this board. Santucci?
Yes.
Ms. Santucci. Can you turn briefly to page 6, please? Just to be clear, so the department's not suggesting that responses weren't received, as evidenced by the fact that for both 14 and 15, the responses were sent in, correct? Okay, so then if we turn to page 16. So pages 16 through 19 represent the response submitted by the person to whom you sent not you, but by the person to whom the department sent the request, which was Richmond 6 Limited, correct?
Correct.
Okay, and Richmond 6 Limited is the registered owner of the property?
Yes, they are.
Okay, now, And again, just to be clear, is that the omission that the department is alleging that's resulting in a failure today, from the department's perspective, relates to the expenses for the property, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Do you know, and if you don't know, that's fine, just whatever it is information you have, do you know what the nature of the responses were for the years leading up to this response being sent from Richmond 6 Limited?
From my understanding, expenses were also not.
So the responses were virtually identical. I mean, the individual rent numbers might have changed, but the nature of the response would have been identical through the years leading up to 2015, correct?
Correct.
Okay, through all of those years, did the department ever contact Richmond 6 to inquire as to why the expenses weren't submitted?
I am unsure if anybody has contacted previously.
To the best of your knowledge, so you haven't, and
Yeah.
as far as you know, no one else had during when these responses were sent?
As far as I know.
Okay. Now, on the searches that you submitted, so now I'm referring to, starting at your page 23, nope, sorry. The corporate searches, was that before that?
12?
There we go, thank you. Starting at page 12. So the page 12 and 13, this is the corporate search for Richmond 6 Limited, which is the owner of the property,
Yes.
and it's the person to whom the request was sent.
Yes.
And there are, if you look under the directors, I gather there are a total of 4 directors: Christopher, Daniel, Douglas, and Paul Murray, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Now, if one turns to page 14, the only director and officer is Dan Murray, correct?
Correct.
Okay. Ms. Santucci, and again, if you're not sure, that's fine, but I'll ask the question. Are you familiar with the legal status of the separate corporations in the eyes of the law? Okay. I'll have more to say that on that point in a minute, Mr. Chairman. Those are my questions.
Okay, anything from the panel for the assessor on the non-co-op?
No questions?
Okay, so with your presentation,
Mr. Chairman? So for the record, I believe the department and we are agreed that in the original 2018 assessment appeal concerning this property and very similar facts and arguments that were made, actually with Mr. Pohl at that time, the Board of Revision denied the penalty and confirmed the 2018 assessment at the end of the day. So that's the nature of the order Ms. Santucci has in her materials, and I think we're all agreed on those facts. So, with respect to the rebuttal evidence, all of which relates to the penalty issue, if I could ask the board and Ms. Santucci to turn to, I'm going through the legislative provisions in the context of the argument. So page 2 is a summary of the legislative provisions, but I'm going to skip forward to the actual nature of the individual arguments relating to the department's position. So on page 3, this relates to, this point is the taxpayer has provided all the information in its possession and control. So this relates to my question with Ms. Santucci as to the legal status of the 2 separate corporations, Richmond 6 Limited and the tenant, which is, as was noted, was a different company. In the eyes of the law, those are 2 distinct separate persons, full stop. That's the situation, and the fact, the corollary is this, and again, we don't deny, Ms. Santucci had pointed out that Dan Murray was a common director and officer for the 2 companies. We're not denying that in any way, shape, or form. But it's like, Mr. Harden, if you and I were brothers, it's like the assessor asking me what your utility costs were. Well, I don't know that. That's the related parties information. Ask them. So, on the one hand, the reason that I have difficulty on this point, there's several points, but on this point, part of the difficulty I'm having with this stems from the fact that on the one hand, the assessment department is asking this board to apply absolute strict compliance. And on the other hand, the despite that strict compliance request, they're asking you to not apply the law, which is very, very clear, relating to the strict distinction between two separate legal persons. So they want strict compliance here, but the fact that they didn't strictly comply themselves and send the request to the occupier for the missing information, they're saying we don't need to do that, or we don't have to do that, that's for the penalty. That's a double standard. What we're suggesting, and this goes to paragraph 3 now, the assessor can only request information that the taxpayer, which in this case is Richmond 6, has. Demanding the information the taxpayer does not have would be illegal and absurd. The taxpayer is obliged to provide the information it has, and in this case, that's what they did. The controller for Richmond 6 took the request, she saw that it was addressed to Richmond 6, and she said, okay, this is Richmond 6's information, and this is what I'm providing. So they, from our perspective, provided the information or documentation to the extent that that information or documentation to which the request relates is in the possession and control of the person. This is the person to whom the request is sent, and that's what they sent in. And that effectively was the rent being paid by Murray Hyundai in this case to Richmond 6. So that's point number 1. Now,
Okay,
point
on that point,
Yes.
I'm gonna ask of the assessor, do you have the covering letter showing to whom it was sent? The request for information?
It would have been sent to the owner, the Richmond 6.
It was sent to
Yes.
Richmond 6?
Yes.
And not Murray
Not to the
Import?
tenant, no.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Now, the second ground, we're suggesting, and Ms. Santucci used the word failure to describe the submission made by Richmond 6, and actually we're suggesting this is not a failure. Page 4 now, from our perspective, 5432 of the Act, which is the board's authority to grant the penalty request, only applies in the extremely limited circumstances where there's been a complete failure to reply, and this is not such a case. What we're suggesting is that there in fact needs to be no response, and in situations where there's been no response whatsoever, that's where the penalty provision is appropriate. And if you look at the middle of page 8 under paragraph, or sorry, page 4 under paragraph 8, the heading is effective providing no information. Where a person fails to comply with the request for information or documentation under 16(1)(c), then the board can make the order. Well, that failure, clearly in the legislature's mind, given the wording of the heading, relates to a complete lack of information, providing no information. In this case, we're suggesting that the person to whom the request was sent, Richmond 6, did in fact provide what was in their possession and control, and clearly this would not be a situation where there's no information provided and therefore not a failure. So for that second reason, we're asking the board to deny the request. This ground number 3, I'm on page 5 now. This has been an ongoing debate over the past several months between the department and Altus, and I expect other agents as well. We are convinced that the assessor is breaching his common law duty to be fair in circumstances such as this. Recall that I had asked Ms. Santucci, and her answers were very forthright about what was sent in previous years, and I actually have that in my evidence. I'll walk you through that in a few minutes. But my point of asking that question was, you've got a taxpayer who is, this taxpayer is responding year in and year out based on information as they actually perceive the request of Richmond 6. Okay, this is what you asked for, this is what we're providing, and they did the same thing year in and year out. And it's only initially with the original 2018 and now with the supplementary 2018, for the first time, the department is now saying, oh, what you did for all those years is a failure. That is not fair. If the reason I'd ask Ms. Santucci, are you aware of the department actually following up with these requests, is if the department, and again, these I'll go through in a few minutes, but the similar responses were sent in for many years prior to 2015. If the department, for instance, in 2012, calendar year 2012, had looked at this and said, you know, there's something not right, we'd like you to check into the utilities and have you submit that. And then if the taxpayer chose not to, okay, well now you've got very clearly two different requests, and you've got a taxpayer who's actually deliberately omitting information, but at least then you provide the taxpayer with the heads up that this is a problem. But to only do it now, or initially in the 2018 hearing, long after there's any opportunity for the taxpayer to address the concern the department has and then ask for the penalty, that is simply not fair. Now, we'll go to the text and where this leads into in the text of my brief on page 5. The common law duty, I quote in paragraph 12 of the case of Cardinal and the director of Kent institution, where the Supreme Court of Canada said that there's a duty of procedural fairness lying on every public authority making an administrative decision which is not of a legislative nature and which affects the rights, privileges, or interests of an individual. That's the case here with the decision of the department to seek the penalty now relating to these questionnaires. So where does the breach come in? We're suggesting, paragraph 13, that the administrative decision made by the assessor here is to inappropriately request the imposition of the penalties in circumstances where it's clear the taxpayers made efforts to provide the information that's in its possession and control. And of course, this has serious consequences because if the board were to grant the request, the 2019 appeal, for all intents and purposes, becomes irrelevant. Now, in Manitoba, in paragraph 14, there was a case called Fergill and Manitoba Municipal Board from 1999, and the court has made a number of comments, but it's consistent in the court's comments concerning this assessment process and the assessment appeal process. They stated that in the case before us, the interpretation advanced by the assessor fails to take into account or to accord with the overall scheme and object of the MAA, the Municipal Assessment Act. It is inconsistent with the overriding requirement that a ratepayer must be dealt with fairly. And that's what's missing in this scenario here. This ratepayer is not being dealt with fairly when this board is now being asked to impose a penalty based on responses that were sent in the same way for years and years and years, and only after the fact, long after the fact, when the taxpayer will not have any opportunity to provide any supplementary information that might be asked, and it's too late to correct these omissions. To now ask for the penalty, it's simply not fair. There's a very famous case coming out of Alberta. It's called Boardwalk Reach and the City of Edmonton, and there was several comments out of that Court of Appeal that provide some insight in this case. In paragraph, turning to page 6, in paragraph 16, there's a number of criteria that the duty of fairness imports, and the key for us, though, if you look in paragraph 16, and there's a quote of paragraph 160, or sorry, a quote which is paragraph number 164 in that case, which talks about the Supreme Court of Canada decision in Baker. They talked about what the elements of the duty of fairness requires, and in number 4, if you look at the subheading 4 towards the bottom of page 6, the legitimate expectations of the person challenging the decision. That's key here because the legitimate expectations of this taxpayer, Richmond 6, when they have responded in the same fashion for 08, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, and 15, that their legitimate expectation is it's been accepted for all of these years, and therefore there shouldn't be any material, anything materially wrong from the department's point of view concerning the submission. In all of those years, there was no follow-up, and the taxpayer certainly has a reasonable expectation that these will be accepted as sufficient for compliance. So, and then turning to page 7, the court, and this is now the court in Boardwalk, saying each of these criteria points to the assessors having to give the appellant a meaningful opportunity to remedy the information problem, defend itself, or both, and that's what wasn't provided here. Now, moving to, in that case, the assessor was basically asking for, there were some minor discrepancies in the replies that had been submitted by Boardwalk, and they were asking for the penalties to be submitted, and that's how this all came to the Alberta Court of Appeal ultimately. So what the court said in paragraph 169 was, therefore the assessor violated natural justice and had no right to move to quash all 90 appeals to the Assessment Review Board summarily without any kind of notice of default to the appellant. Paragraph 178, simple fairness entitles a citizen to speak to a government decision maker before that entity abrogates all of his or her rights, and that's what we're asking for here. That's why we're saying there's been a breach of duty. Paragraph 179, the appellant taxpayer lost all because the assessor made two decisions here. First, not to tell the appellant the perceived flaws in its answers, and instead to wait until after assessment. Second, to move to quash all the appeals. Those two decisions let the assessor pick virtually any assessment figure he wished. So the assessor's decision to lie in the weeds and reveal nothing to the taxpayer petrified any flaw or omission by either of them, even one formerly easy to correct. It became irretrievable after assessments. All this violated the rules of natural justice and procedural fairness. None of that can stand on appeal, and that is the essence of the submission concerning the fairness issue in this case. So in those, in these circumstances, then we're suggesting for all of these reasons, the penalty should be denied. Now, the last point, ground number 4, I'm on page 8 now. The modern approach taken by courts in terms of statutory interpretation is very much a theological or looking at the purpose of the legislation. What's the objective? The objective, clearly, of the legislation, the courts have commented on this in Manitoba, the objective of these requests is to get the information. It's not, in the Court of Appeal action, as Richardson said, the objective is not to punish the taxpayer, it's to get the information. Well, if in situations like this, the taxpayers, and in similar situations where we've seen where reasonably what we perceive to be very, very unfair decisions being made by the department, which actually do have the effect of punishing the taxpayer. From an outside perspective, I'm going to suggest these kinds of things, and similar cases we've seen recently, the objective of the department is going to be perceived by the taxpayer as punishment. And that's exactly what the courts have said. This is not the objective. So I'm suggesting for all of these reasons, and to give intent, or give effect to the legislation in circumstances such as these, the penalty should be denied. Now, on pages 12 and 13, there's an email. Corinne Campbell is the individual who filled out the questionnaires, and again, this was in the context of the original 2018 assessment appeal, and of course the very same fact situations apply here, where I asked Ms. Campbell about what was provided was an possession control of Richmond 6, which she agreed, and the tenant pays these other expenses directly, and she also agreed with that. So the controller for Richmond 6 was in fact providing information that was in that person's care and control, or information and control. Now what I suggested, or asked Ms. Santucci, was her thoughts as to the previous submissions, and what I've provided to this board from pages 15 through to the end of the brief, page 36. It's the submissions all the way from 2015 and then going back as far as 2011. That's the very earliest submission was due in June of 2012, so it would have been based on the 2011 calendar year. So for all of those years, what you will see, if you can, I'll leave it with you if you wish to go through them all, but the responses are exactly the same. Each and every year they responded in exactly the same manner, and given the breaker criteria of reasonable expectation of the taxpayer in this case, I'd suggest any reasonable expectation would be that the submissions were compliant, and to now request a penalty is manifestly unfair, and therefore we're asking the board to deny the request this morning. Thank you.
Any questions?
My only question is, so Corinne Campbell, the mailer was sent to Richmond 6, but the person who fills it out, or who they delegate to fill it out, is from Murray Automotive Group.
No, she's an employee of Richmond 6.
Okay.
She's full disclosure. Kareem is physically located within the Murray Chevrolet building. There's no question that she's there, but she's replying to the request to Richmond 6 Limited with that information. That's what she understood was being asked for. That's how she responded.
Thank you.
Any questions from the panel? What you're essentially arguing, it's a novel argument, first time I've heard it in this setting, on your third argument is basically promissory estoppel.
Well, in those terms, I hadn't thought about it in those terms, but you're right. I'm phrasing it as reasonable expectation based on what was submitted, and you know, the fact that that the responses were accepted as sufficient. I hadn't thought about the term promissory estoppel, but,
And of course, the way to end a promissory estoppel situation was for the other party to say, in the future, we're going to start to enforce our legal rate.
well, okay, and that's fair. If the assessor, and that was my point of them not following up, if the assessor had said in 2012, or quite frankly, with what they're saying now, I can tell you that we're suggesting to many of our clients, look, this is becoming an issue, so if you've got a way to get this further information, then do it. But that's not what happened up until very recently, so to go backwards, to basically petrify it, when as the boardwalk said, when the alleged omissions were petrified and it was too late to do anything about it, then to ask for the penalty, it's too late. That's unfair.
Okay, we'll take a few minutes to
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
caucus on this, so you guys can leave the room now that we got more people. Okay, we'll come back to order. We will deny the request for non-cooperation as the owner did respond with information they had. So we felt that that was adequate response on their part. And if they wanted more information that the tenant would have, they should talk to the tenant. Even though the tenant and owner are not really arm's length. Okay, so then we'll proceed on value.
So, this is roll number 0306504360. This is, again, a complete auto dealership. The original building was built in 2007, and the addition was put on for 2018. If we flip to page 2, we see the aerial shots of the completed addition. And if we flip to page 3, in the bottom picture, we show the original building. So the size has increased. On pages 4 and 5, we just have a few interior and exterior photos of the building after the renovation and addition. On page 6, we just have the request for information, subject sale history, property leases. And on page 7, I have my rent comparables. Since vehicle dealerships are typically owner-occupied and there's a lack of market data, we are using comparable rents for large retail big box stores that are probably most comparable. Larger buildings with retail fronts, office space, warehouses, storage and mezzanine, and typically a slab foundation. So while these comps are not identical, they're the most comparable. And some of these comps may be superior. The total weighted average of the comparables is $16.95, and the 2014 to 16 weighted average is $17.81. If you flip to page 8, we have the income workup. We have the new leasable area as the 24,921 square feet, and we've applied a rental rate of $12.78. And we're using the same parameters as we did in the 2018, the 2% vacancy, 7% for the expenses shortfall, and then the overall capitalization rate of 7.5%. If you turn to page 9, we just have the income value summary. Turn to page 10, we have the capitalization rates generated by our model. 11 and 12 are just, or 11 is Municipal Assessment Act. And if we turn to page 20, we just have the previous board order for 2018, which shows the value was confirmed. On page 21, I have the original brief. Just shows the smaller gross floor, or smaller leasable area of 15,492 square feet. And on page 22, it shows the original workup. Again, the same parameters besides the leasable area and the rent per square foot. And page 23, 24, and 25 are for the permits, just to show that there was construction of one-story, 1,727 square foot showroom addition at the front, one-story, 6,034 square foot addition for a shop at the rear, and additional mezzanine space of 1,668 square feet, for a total declared construction value of $2,215,000.
Mr. Chairman, I'd object to that last part of the information as being post-reference. I don't object to the physical description at all.
Oh.
But
What the
Oh, the value.
the values,
It's after.
values are declared as of January of 18. I have no objections to the physical description.
okay, we'll remove the post-reference material.
Sorry, what page was that?
And that's, my my recommendation is to maintain the 2019 assessed value of $3,834,000. Thank you, that's my presentation.
Any questions?
Just a couple, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Santucci, page 8. So to get to the heart of the matter, the 2% vacancy, was that model driven?
Yes.
Okay, and as was the cap rate of 7.5?
Yes.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman, those are my only questions.
Okay, any questions of the assessor?
No questions.
Just looking, the rate you used per square foot was
It is
$12.78. Previously, you
It was-
used $13.22, so it's a little bit
Yeah.
economy of scale, right?
Mhm.
Okay. All right, you can proceed.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman, and I will preface this with we both, Ms. Santucci and I talked about the board order earlier, and it had confirmed the original assessment for 2018, to make the board aware of that. The issues in that case and in this case that we're bringing to this hearing relate only to vague. We have no issue with the rent, either the original rent or the rent applied by the department for this hearing. Most of the space that was added was shop space, but certainly the 1278, we're not taking issue with that rent for the larger area. The 2% we have concerns with. We certainly the materials that we have relating to retail generally would support a rate of no less than 4%. And in terms of the cap rate, the department's applied 7.5%. We have, I believe I had submitted it for the purpose of this hearing, the capitalization rate study that we've provided. Certainly 7.5 is within the range, but we're suggesting, based on the trends in the market, we're not disputing that there would have been some compression in the cap rate between the 2016 assessments and the 2018 assessment. The 2016 assessment is based on an April 1, 14 valuation date, and the present assessment based on an April 1, 2016 reference date. But we are suggesting for 2016, this property was assessed using a cap rate of 8%. We're suggesting a 50-point compression is excessive, and we're suggesting 25 points. So the 7.75% that we're suggesting is also within the range of the cap rate evidence that we've got, and that's on page 9 of the cap rate study, where the capitalization rates that we derive are between 7.15 and 9.11. The difficulty is none of these are car dealerships, so there isn't any direct evidence as to cap rates we can provide to this board relating to car dealerships specifically, but we are looking at some of these rates and the compression between 16 and 18, and we thought 7.75 was fair. And that then, if one turns to page 7 of our materials, and if you apply the 4% vacancy allowance and 7.75% cap, we're suggesting a value this morning of, this afternoon, of $3,598,000. Thank you.
Any questions? $3,598,000.
So for the capitalization rate, in the rate study, does yours fall between a range, or did you just use?
Well, we looked at this, so if one turns to page 9 of that study, with the cap rates that we derived there, they range from 7.15 to 9.11. And so we took a look at that, and more specifically with the car dealerships, the compression between the previous, the 2016-17 assessments and the 18-19 assessments. And we felt that the 25 points was, that we are recognizing some compression, but we believe 25 points is appropriate, going from 8 to 7.75.
And then in the 2018 appeal previous to the SEP, was the cap rate, I'm sorry, I don't have that part of the brief. Was that the cap rate you asked for in 2018 as well?
For the original
Yeah.
18 submission, yes, it was.
Okay.
It's an exact 4% in vacancy and 7.75 cap.
Vacancy.
Yeah, indeed.
That is any questions, thank you.
Okay, any questions from the panel?
No questions.
I just have a question about your vacancy, so can you, you've stated that you believe that it should be 4, and what are you basing that on?
What we had, and there's a report out there called the Johnson Report, but unfortunately I didn't realize I didn't submit the separate retail vacancy study. We have a separate retail vacancy study that talks more about big blocks than car dealerships, but it was because the department's vacancy parameters for big box and grocery stores was at the 2% level. And part of that, so I'm gonna remove that conversation from the big box and into the car dealership realm. Part of what we saw when we reviewed the market reports and the Johnson report was that there was no category of retail property that was less than 4%. It was generally between 4 and 6. So we believe that the 4% in this case for car dealerships would represent the very minimum that an investor would assume if the property was valued using the income approach. But what I don't have for you is that separate, and I apologize to this board, because there is a separate retail study that would focus on the big box and the grocery stores, but it would at least provide that market evidence that I'm talking about. So it's on that basis though that I'm asking for the 4%.
Okay, thank you for the clarification. And just, also just to clarify, so you were saying that the addition and the renovations that went into the dealership, most of the additional space went to shop space?
Indeed.
Was there any kind of upgrading of the showroom area, or?
Well, the showroom the retail space actually expanded. So Ms. Santucci's got a great photo actually. So if you look at Ms. Santucci's brief on page 3. Ms. Santucci, you want to? So this is new showroom space. So when I think it was 1,600 feet or so. So
This
is
little
actually,
piece up here, okay.
This piece up here is new showroom space,
Okay.
and this is the
And
shop
this is
space
the
that was
shop,
added.
okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
And then I think there was just some, if I'm not clear, like they did do some work to this showroom when they added on the front.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it looks, it looked to me substantially the same, but it might have been, spiffed up a bit.
Yeah.
But that, as far
Just
as
a
the
match,
addition
okay.
goes, it was, yeah.
Okay, that's all I have, thank you.
Okay, and I have no questions, so.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
All right, thank you for your time, and we'll get back to you presently.
Thank you.